Hey, thanks so much for joining us again on Conversations with Cliff. My name is David Evenden. I'm the owner and founder of Standard User Cyber and Standard User Institute. This is my good friend Cliff, who is also the president of Standard User Institute. Hey, Cliff, how you doing?
Hey, I'm doing all right today. How are you doing?
Oh, I'm doing great. I'm doing pretty good. Just another day in Groundhog's Day, but it's fun. Yep, it's good to go. So over the past couple of weeks, we've talked about all kinds of cyber-related conversations, and it's been really great to kind of expand out
Excuse me.
and converse about these. Um, but today, it sounds like in the past couple of weeks, we've sort of been bringing it home with phishing campaigns and identity theft. And it sounds like today maybe you're wanting to chat a little bit about what the human element of, or rather, I'm sorry, the element of human error within the life cycle of hacking.
Yeah, the life cycle of hacking and as well as just the use of technology during the stay-at-home period. My day job is a teacher, and so we're doing a lot of meetings online, and it just amazes me sometimes what difficulties teachers and administrators have just with the use of technology, making it work correctly, and the snafus that they have, and it's all because they weren't quite prepared to use it, or they don't quite know how to do it. Or I know, as you know, when you're in the spotlight, you're up front in charge. Sometimes you have like a brain freeze and something you can do easily. Most of the time, you just kind of mess up just a little bit. But there is the human component, and even now, as I was listening to you give the introduction, you went off the air for a few seconds. It's because I forgot to completely turn my phone off. I have to turn all the notifications off, because if it notifies me of anything, I lose, you're just talking for several seconds and I can't hear a word that you're saying. So it's
Right.
just those forgetful kinds of things. I had a great conversation with a friend of mine in Massachusetts yesterday, and he's on the team for his church that runs their Zoom meetings, and they have about 200 people or so that come in for their Zoom services on Sundays. But they have like a discussion group at first, then the main meeting for worship, then they have another discussion group after that, and then they have a fellowship time where they can even put people off into different side rooms within Zoom. And I didn't even know you could do that. And then after that, they're going to have their monthly meeting for business through Zoom. And anyone in the world, they just publish it on their website, how to get in there, so anybody in the world can get in. So they have he and another team, a team of people work together to run the technology for these meetings, and they have a weekly meeting just to make sure everybody knows what they're doing, and that they have all of the settings correctly set up each time, because I guess there's a way that you can set up Zoom where not just anybody can take control of the meeting. And I guess that's what the big controversy with Zoom has been, that some outsider can come in, take control of the meeting, the whole entire screen, and put offensive material up there, or whatever. And so there's a way to prevent that from happening, but you have to have the settings. You have to know what you're doing. So there's this human component in all of our technology where things don't work out the way we think they're going to. As you know, I've been reading Cybersecurity for Dummies by Joseph Steinberg, and it's a great book. But he talks about the way that technology has advanced so rapidly in recent years, and he says even beyond our science fiction dreams. I remember when I was a little kid, I heard that someday we will be able to see the person on video that we're talking to on the telephone. And it seemed unbelievable, but now, we've been doing this through Skype now for many years, and in the early 2000s, I remember talking to a guy who was in the army in Iraq. I talked to him through Skype on video. And isn't that, it just blows my mind to think about that. And now we take it for granted. And now we can have meetings with, maybe even hundreds of people all at the same time through video. And so it really is kind of amazing. And he makes the point, Steinberg makes the point, how the human brain hasn't really evolved that much. The brain function is, basically the same. I mean, it changes over the long term, but in the short term, it's not that much. And so we've got all this new kinds of information that we're dealing with. And he says, as one example, he just simply asked the question, how many passwords did your grandparents need to remember? And in my case, the answer is probably 0. And in your case, your grandparents might needed to know a few more than that. But how many passwords do you have that you need to remember?
Yeah.
And me, it's dozens, and it's difficult to keep track of them all. And but he makes the point that even though I think my passwords are relatively secure, he says most passwords can be hacked remotely using automated tools that dramatically increases our risk. And there are people out there, unbelievably, but that's their goal in life, is to figure out how to steal money from people. Right. And that's why we need cybersecurity and to keep ourselves secure. And so we've got a whole different kinds of vulnerability these days than we used to. And so he makes a point that people just make mistakes. And I don't know if you have many comments on that or not, but I'd like to give you a chance to kind of give your 2 cents on human error.
Sure. Yeah. The majority of the time when human error within the life cycle of hacking, the majority of the time whenever that's brought into place, there's one main area where that conversation is pushed out at, and that's the human error of reacting to phishing campaigns. Somebody sends you an email, you interact with that, or you click on something online, which we've talked about both of those conversations in the last few weeks. But and so that, generally speaking, when someone hears human error, that's what they think of. The greatest risk to an environment or a corporate enterprise is the human element. But that conversation, really, to Steinberg's point, expands out so much further. Software development, installation, architectural design, just the whole world. I mean, even in pen testing, there's a human element in an error. Did I ensure that I tested everything? Did I ensure that all of this was done properly? And if you don't do that right, and then somebody comes back and identifies a vulnerability that you didn't test for, that's a human element. That's a human error on your end as an assessor, where you didn't identify the specific vulnerability. Now it's coming back on you. And so in the software development lifecycle, for instance, we offer certain types of services, SDLC, security integration, if you will, SDLC being software development lifecycle. That's a bunch of people developing a certain type of software and application, and there's different elements of best practices that need to be applied to the methodologies used to develop certain types of software. If you don't have those, it's going to be easier and easier to exploit that software and gain access to an operating system or an integrated network, if you will. And so, and then at the same time, you build out the software. It has best practices. It has user endpoint best practices. When installing this, do this. And in that installation process, sometimes you come back in, your boss is like, I need you to get this stuff now. And you skip all those best practices, you get it installed and you get deployed. And that's an element of human error. I forgot to change the default password because I was doing it so fast. that default password allows for hackers to hack in, rather log in, and then gain access to that machine or that website, and then might even additionally expand, give them access to the rest of the network. And so, and then at the same time, if somebody does gain access and you haven't properly configured a network, and your network is very flat and you don't have any network segmentation in there, we're sort of talking about more advanced concepts here, but really, in order, let's just take network segmentation down just really quickly. I have critical assets, I have not critical assets, I have assets connected to the internet. Now, if all of these assets connected to the internet, critical assets, and just normal regular assets, if they're all flat, it means that they all can talk to each other. There's nothing in between them preventing communication back and forth. Anyone can touch any machine within the environment. That's a flat network. Well, integrating network segmentation prevents a machine where you call it a DMZ, or basically a segmented area where if somebody does gain access to a publicly accessible endpoint, even if they gain access to that, they're not going to be able to route back through the rest of the network and gain access to all of your highly confidential critical assets. Ensuring that it's designed properly prevents people from moving even further into the network because it's segmented properly. If your boss is like, I need you to get this network up quick, I need you to get this endpoint up quick, and you don't implement the firewalls correctly or the rules correctly or segment it properly, it's an element of human error.
Well, that if I could just add two things. I mean, one thing that Steinberg says about ransomware, which we've talked about before, he says the more sophisticated ransomware somehow knows how to creep back into the network deeper to find the more sensitive data.
Right. And really, I mean, we've seen that lots and lots of times. That type of ransomware really is, in our previous conversation, it's a worm. And worms, really what they do is, the only way you know how to do that as a worm is you're collecting situational awareness about the operating system that you're currently on. So the operating system you're on might be your computer, whatever it is, and you're doing like an ARPTech A or a NetStat or a route. And you do those different types of things. You identify what you're currently connected to, what you're currently communicating with. And then once you identify what you're communicating with, you say, hey, my IP address is the 192 range, but I'm communicating with somebody in the 10.10.10 range. We're talking about IP addresses, which don't worry about those, but somebody in an adjacent IP address schema. Now I know that this is an additional IP address schema, and I'm seeing all these additional ones. These are the only IP addresses that I see. But what happens if I scan that entire range? Now I know that range is there. I scan the whole range. Once I scan it, now I know these attributes are up. Once I know those are up, now I scan those live attributes for known vulnerabilities. And now I can migrate into those other aspects of those other environments. That's how a worm.
So you're saying that the worm is programmed to figure out how to do that stuff.
More advanced worms. So, for instance, this might be another conversation. There was in the early 2000s, maybe the late 90s. I know it was around for quite a while, but it was a program called Stuxnet. So Stuxnet. Yes. So that was like a really efficient, use the MS-08-067 Net API exploit on Windows platforms in order to migrate from machine to machine. So it's built into it for a zero-day exploit, a previously unknown exploit, unfound, unseen, and it allowed for you to gain access to any operating system in the adjacent areas.
Yeah.
And so by scanning, you now know what's there. You can throw that exploit, gain access, or migrate over. If even throwing that exploit is required, you might be able to get system on the local box, get the administrator credentials, and then migrate using pass the hash. Pass the hash is really just you log in your computer with your password. What if I didn't need a password? What if in that process of what's actually happening, you enter your password, your operating system takes that password, turns it into a hash. It checks that hash against the local hash in your operating system to see, did he enter the right password? And if the answer is yes, it logs you in. Well, what happens if you're able to skip that password step and you just had the hash? I don't know what your password is. I just know what the hash is. Can I give that hash to the operating system and say, this is my password? Is there a way to get it to say, okay, sure, yeah, that's the right hash. Come on in. That's
Hmm.
past the hash. That's what SMB uses. SMB is a it's a network. It's a Windows-based network protocol. It also has Samba, which is on Linux platforms, but it allows for you to share, like when you're sharing files. You want to share like a file server. You want to share your folder with other people in a network. You're doing that via SMB. It allows for you to connect in. So there's an authentication portion of that. So it pretends like, hey, I'm sharing my local C drive, when in reality, you're providing access to other people gaining access to your machine. That's how it's kind of getting
Yeah,
off.
that is getting more technical. But if I could, just go back just a little bit, you were talking about, having for companies to segment their systems.
Right.
So if they properly segmented them, would that keep a worm from migrating?
Yes.
Okay.
To answer your question, if they've properly segmented it, it would absolutely keep a worm from
Yeah.
migrating. It would be able to migrate within that cluster of computers that it has access to, but it's not going to move out of that cluster.
Yeah. So human error might I think what you're saying, it's not just about humans making a mistake. It's about them not really thinking about how to design this system or in a way that will keep people out.
Well, technically, yes, but if you think about it, um, I know the design should be like this. I'm not designing it like that. I'm making a mistake. So it is that still it's that human error.
Hmm.
Most most senior network administrators, sysadmin, network defense personnel, they know the right answer. They know it needs to be segmented. They know it needs to be cut off from the rest of the network. They know it needs to be designed like that. They just don't have the resources, they don't have the funding, and they don't have the time to do it properly.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, going back a little farther, I'm going to read you a quote by Joseph Steinberg, and he says here that the main point to understand is that the piping of the internet is quite complex and was not initially designed with security in mind and is vulnerable to many forms of misuse.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, as I recall, I mean, the internet was originally kind of set up, so university professors could communicate with each other.
Right.
And, and I suppose, there's probably some of them that would like to steal the intellectual property of some of their um, other people, but for the
Yeah.
most part, they didn't think about secure, the having to have a secure network. And Steinberg says it's very complex, but I mean, part of me starts thinking about, well, can't they just start rewiring it, or just making it more
Yeah. It's extremely expensive. But yeah.
okay?
Yeah, I mean that, and they kind of are to a certain element, with laying down fiber optic cables, but it's still expensive. You're talking about billions and billions and billions of dollars to do that,
Uh,
and so and even still, the wiring itself is not what prevents a computer hacker from doing something. It's putting the proper controls in between those wires,
right.
with their firewalls and routes and all that deal. Um, in fact, I just watched Hackers the other day. I think it's a rite of passage for computer hackers to watch that once a year. It's a pretty good movie about a bunch of kids, and it came out in '95, and there's sort of a scene of showing how one person was able to connect into another machine, and really, it literally is just entering in the phone number for that machine, and then or the IP address, and being able to connect to it.
Mhm.
There's no authentication. There's nothing required in order to get in there. That was how it was originally designed. Was, hey, I'll set this up and you can just connect in, and then as soon as things start to go back, I say, hey, maybe we should start putting some passwords on these where people can't just connect in whatever they want to. and that's exactly right. You know, it was designed in a way to provide access to information, um, and then all of that access started to get limited once people started to abuse that.
Yeah. And people that want to steal money or swindle people out of money or whatever, they just get more creative all the time.
That's right. Yep.
Steinberg mentioned, I think it was like a $30 billion scheme where 9 people from the US and Ukraine were indicted for stealing press releases before they were released,
Okay.
so that they could purchase, so that they could make trades on the stock market to benefit. So it was a very sophisticated kind of insider trading scheme.
Yeah, that's smart. You gotta give it to him. That's a good idea.
Yeah, so it's, so human error. I mean, you can do, you can try to think of all the ways you might be vulnerable, but um, there's other people thinking of ways to outsmart you.
Right. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, cool. Well, this is this has been a great conversation on the introduction of the element of human error within the life cycle of hacking. Appreciate you asking these questions and thinking about um, your perspective within the greater scheme of life cycle of hacking. I always think, in my mind, I always think from the perspective of the attacker, not from the person, trying to protect themselves.
Right.
So that's a good perspective. Thanks for bringing it up.
Yeah, you're welcome. I
Yeah.
enjoy these conversations very much.
Yeah, me too. Okay, awesome. Well, thanks so much, and we'll see you next time on Conversations with Cliff.
All right. Thanks a lot.
Yep.